Hi, I'm Lindsay Kirchhoff from howtomarketome.com, and I'm here today with social psychology professor, published author, and blogger for Psychology Today, plus one of my favorite professors, Sam Sommers.
Sorry.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start off first by talking about your new book, Situations Matter. Could you give us a little introduction?
Sure. So the book is the story of how ordinary situations shape who we are, how we think, how we act, essentially how human nature turns out to be really surprisingly context dependent. I would argue that marketing is in many respects these principles in practice, this idea of paying attention to context and figuring out how to pull the strings and how to situate something within a context to make it as appealing to a potential consumer as possible.
So basically, if you're a marketer, you need to read this book.
That's exactly right.
One of the most interesting chapters I thought was that you are not who you think you are, where when you ask people about what drives their decisions, it turns out to be drastically different from what actually drives their decisions.
Right. It's sort of a well-established finding now in behavioral sciences that people are remarkably good at giving you answers to questions. That doesn't mean they're necessarily remarkably good at giving you accurate answers to their question. Depending on when you ask that question, and depending on who asks that question, and what's going on in my life when you ask that question, I give a very different answer to it.
A lot of marketers, when they're trying to get to know their consumer base, they do surveys, or they ask questions,
right,
like what influences your decision when you buy this product? And it seems like, from your book, that might not be the best way to go in some cases.
Those data, self-report data like those play a role, right? It's going to suggest that the focus group of the market research is meaningless. It's not at all, but it only tells part of the story.
What other methods would you use to discover what influences people's purchasing decisions if you can't just simply ask them?
Behavioral observation, like running studies.
Okay.
I'm a big believer as an empirical psychologist who runs studies and collects data myself that you learn a lot more from people's actual behaviors and people's actual choices than you do sometimes by asking them about them. Find out where they're most receptive to this message, whether it's while they're with a group of people, while they're with family, while they're sitting still somewhere versus at a sporting event. I mean, test those kinds of things out and see what the most receptive response is. I think that that's what you're doing effectively when you're being an effective marketer.
I'd like to talk a little bit about celebrity endorsers.
Yeah, sure.
Because that's something I talk about in my blog.
Yeah.
And I remember in your What You See Is What You Get chapter of the book, you talk about how it's sort of funny because the celebrity might not be an expert on a product, or they might have nothing to do with it. Right. But then it still helps sell products.
Well, so here's another good example of the limitations of self-report, right? If you ask people about the celebrity endorsers have an effect on you, I think the vast majority of people would be like, no, not at all. If you ask people, do laugh tracks on TV shows make you think something's funnier? They'd be like, no, of course not. But in the natural selection Darwinian world that is corporate America, those things have persisted, and they persist for a reason, I imagine. I mean, it says his name, but you realize that's who it is, and you like that voice, and they do work, I think, right? I mean, they do work to the point where various TV shows have hired professional laughers to sit in their audience, much like the professional sports fans.
Learning about all sorts of career options today.
Yeah, exactly. For people who have very hearty guffaws. Yes. And so, they do make a difference, and the celebrity endorser, I think, does, even though we know the celebrity endorser has been paid for her or his expertise and their endorsement, and that Tiger Woods probably never really did drive a Buick. I think it's a good demonstration of the people's intuition and their self-reports about what affects their behavior are going to be different than what you actually find behaviorally.
I did one post about familiarity in celebrity endorsers, and I talked about Sofia Vergara as the cover girl. My theory was people like her already and like her personality, so they might be more responsive to her recommending a product versus someone random.
Absolutely, right? I mean, that's what they're taking advantage of. You're capitalizing on the idea that there's this well-known research finding in the literature about mere exposure, the idea that the more you're exposed to something, the more you like it. And that can be the song you hear a couple times on the radio, that can be the person who you sit next to in class but never even have an interaction with. The research suggests that the more you sit next to someone in class, the more you like him or her, the more you're attracted to him or her.
That's wild.
So, yeah, so that's, I think you're right, the familiarity is what's going on here.
One of my favorite blog posts that you wrote dealt with the YouTube video about a little girl who was complaining about girl toys and boy toys, and it has to go, and also you talk about it a lot in your book as well, with products that are marketed specifically to one gender. Even something as innocuous as Legos right now, they have a girl Legos.
As a psychologist and as a parent, the very clear messages that were sent, not just from corporate America, but from all over the place, that are, boys should do this and girls should do that, are problematic for both boys and girls. From that perspective, the idea of targeting boys and girls differently bothers me, right? And I write about sort of its implications. That from a marketing perspective,
it's tougher. It's tougher because, and that's why I was so interested to talk to you about it, is because say you're marketing a product where it's your majority of your buyers are women. How do you advertise to them without supporting a gender rule that you don't think is necessarily fair?
Well, as with anything where you are in sales and marketing and trying to change people's attitudes in a certain direction, there is that, I would think sometimes, that tension between maybe what you think is the way you'd like the world to be and the way the world seems to be, and that you need to capitalize on and market to. If there's a traditional way of thinking about a certain product or a certain product type that's really drawn on firm gender lines, and that could be something that you capitalize on.
Situations matter. It's a great read, and I'm telling everyone about it, just so you know. And I think that's it. Thank you for talking with me.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
All right.